Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and I want to welcome you all to the inaugural episode of Should Have Been Goosebumps. This series will be revolved around examining kids' horror television properties from the 1990s to present day that are outside of the Goosebumps IP, but contain episodes that feel more like Goosebumps than the IPs they're a part of. And I could pick no better episode than from one of Goosebumps' greatest rivals within the genre. And it comes from Are You Afraid of the Dark? This episode hails from Season 6, and it's Episode 8, The Tale of the Vampire Town. Now, this video will contain spoilers. If you haven't seen the episode before and do not want to be spoiled, please pause the video or click off, go watch the episode, and then come back. If you're curious where you can watch this episode, I will provide a link down in the description of the video, so you may do so. Thank you. 14-year-old Adder Carballo and his parents are visiting on vacation in a small town called Wisteria, so Adder can fulfill his fantasy of being a vampire hunter. A week prior, there was a sighting of a vampire by the town mortician named Carl Mueller. Carl had a close encounter with a presumed vampire, but the cross around his neck scared it off. Adder, assuring his parents that Wisteria is known for its vampires, concludes that it was none other than the mythical Dreyfus, a vampire of local legend. Upon arriving to the town hotel, a renovated mansion that houses catacombs underneath, Adder and his parents encounter Stanley, a nervous man who acknowledges the town's association with vampires. Since Adder dresses like a gothic child, Stanley assumes that Adder might be a vampire himself, especially when Adder requests to enter the catacombs. Stanley makes a call to Carl, the man attacked a week prior, to tell him that he thinks Adder is the vampire who attacked him. Meanwhile, Adder waits for his parents to go to bed before entering the catacombs alone without permission. Armed with raven's blood and a portable camera, Adder descends into the catacombs. Upon the spooky caverns, Adder eventually finds what appears to be the tomb of Dreyfus. After tampering with the coffin, Adder is confronted by Carl and Stanley, armed with mallets and wooden stakes, accusing Adder of being a vampire. Adder runs and gets lost in the catacombs, but unbeknownst to him, Dreyfus, who's been sealed in his tomb for a long time, has been freed. The disfigured vampire chases Adder through the catacombs, and Adder eventually finds himself stuck. Panicked, he makes a break for it, and eventually finds an entrance to escape that puts him in the funeral parlor belonging to Carl. Carl and Stanley then confront Adder, while Adder begs the two to listen to him. Carl seems to be understanding and advised to stop chasing Adder when Dreyfus appears from a cloud of dark mist into the room. Stanley runs away, leaving Adder and Carl to fend for their lives. Dreyfus attempts to attack them when Adder pulls out a vial of raven's blood that he had brought with him. Dreyfus is immediately drawn to the blood, and Adder obliges by giving it to him. Unbeknownst to Dreyfus, the sun had broken dawn, so when Adder pulls back the drapes nearby, the sunlight takes Dreyfus's undead life. Carl thanks Adder and apologizes. Adder seems to be glad that it's all over. Later, Adder's parents are outside the hotel, wondering where Adder could have gone. Adder shows up, out of his gothic attire, and ready to attempt normal activities. Adder realizes there's something he has to do before they go, so he heads back to the hotel. Inside, he calls for Stanley to say goodbye. He offers the raven's blood to Stanley in case there are any more vampires in the catacombs that can potentially show up at some point. Before Adder can leave, he remembers something crucial. The vampire who attacked Carl the week prior couldn't have been Dreyfus, because Adder was the one who freed Dreyfus from his locked tomb. Stanley reveals he was hoping to blame Adder for the attack on Carl, since living in Wisteria gets harder and harder to conceal being a vampire. Stanley grabs Adder, where Adder notices Stanley has no reflection in a mirror nearby. As Adder quivers, Stanley tells Adder he hopes that he liked Wisteria, because he'll be staying there a long, long time. Stanley draws his fangs, and the story ends before we can learn what happens to Adder. So, why should the tale of the vampire town be considered worthy of being in Goosebumps? Well, the first thing I want to bring up is that Adder, unlike most Are You Afraid of the Dark episodes, fits the age bracket of a typical Goosebumps protagonist. Now, it depends on what medium we're talking about. In the books, they're most of the time between the ages of 10 to 13 years old. But in the episodes, for some reason, the producers and the writers sometimes made the main characters 14 years old. Prime example would be Grady from The Werewolf of Fever Swamp. Now, Adder is 14 years old. Does that mean he's in high school? Does that mean he's in middle school? Who knows? Maybe he could have failed a grade. Maybe he's from a state that has 9th grade being the cap of middle school. And that does exist, people. There's also states with 5th grade being the start of middle school. It just depends. Adder fits that typical age bracket, so he's fine enough with me. The second thing I want to bring up is the nature of the story feels right out of the mind of R.L. Stine. And I want to start with Adder. Adder feels like a character R.L. Stine would have written. He is very invested in his hobby of being a vampire hunter, and that gets in the way of his relationship with his family. Now, this trope of a character being invested in something and the family not understanding them for that interest is a common trope used in Goosebumps, and it's no different here. But Adder being an only child kind of elevates the humor in the story a little bit, because his father wants him to be normal, while his mother wants him to be himself. And you see that struggle with the parents on trying to parent Adder, and since Adder doesn't have a sibling, it seems like he has nothing else better to do than pretend to be a vampire hunter. Now, living out his fantasy, is it delusional? Is it parents enabling him? That's debatable, but that's also controversial things that happen in Goosebumps books. So, in terms of Adder and his family, it fits right in. The third thing I want to bring up is the setting. The town of Wisteria feels like a gothic town that a Goosebumps book would be set in. The settings of the old mansion that was renovated to be a hotel, the whole prologue with Carl setting up the story and this mystery around the vampire is something straight out of Goosebumps. Goosebumps books have prologues that set up the meat in the middle of the story, and normally the prologues will tie in with the ending, and in the case of this episode, it fits. So you have a setting that fits right in, and you have a prologue setting up a mystery aspect that fits in with Goosebumps that is known to have mysteries as well. And that kind of stems to the villains, which really fit into the Goosebumps IP as well. Dreyfus, quote-unquote, the mythical vampire, feels like a Goosebumps villain. And even Stanley, who's recontextualized to be the main villain of the whole story near the end, is a common thing in Goosebumps to have a twist involving an uber villain or a villain from the shadows that you didn't see coming. And that fits very well with how Goosebumps streamlines their stories. As a matter of fact, Are You Afraid of the Dark rarely has twist endings to them or dark endings. I think there's maybe like 6 to maybe 8 episodes that actually have twists to them. And this is the one episode that I can honestly say has a genuine twist ending. And it's a dark one where Adder loses. And that's no uncommon thing in Goosebumps. It's more prevalent in the darker stories, like something like Werewolf Skin, but yeah, that's there. But the last thing I want to bring up is the spooky atmosphere, the tone of the story, and the character growth of Adder. Now, I guess I'll bring up character growth here first. Character growth is not common in Goosebumps stories, let's be honest. There's a lot of de-evolution going on, a lot of characters not learning from their mistakes in the story, not growing as characters because Stine doesn't put the effort in there. But you see Adder grow from his hobby of wanting to be a vampire hunter, being a vampire hunter, having to live to the responsibilities of being a vampire hunter and attempting to hang it up and move on from it. So, for that, it kind of elevates it, and if it was a Goosebumps story, or maybe a book, it would be one of the more wholer feeling stories. The spooky atmosphere really sets in with the catacombs throughout this episode. They look fantastic, and they look like something that the production team of the Goosebumps television show would have come up for this story, and it fits right at home. And that also stems to the directing style here too. Are You Afraid of the Dark normally doesn't have this type of directing style to it, but it all strangely fits in. And another thing to bring up is the overall product. The delivery, the packaging, all of that, the start to the story to the end of the story, progresses like your average Goosebumps book. So, with all of that put together, it's safe to say that the one Are You Afraid of the Dark episode I would consider to be worthy of being in Goosebumps. It's perhaps the most worthy of being in Goosebumps out of all these episodes I will talk about. And maybe not all of them will share the same tropes that this one has, but this one is spooky enough, but not quite too scary, but has its dark moments and its graphic moments to it, if you want to call it that, to make it stand out. So, that is the first episode of Should Have Been in Goosebumps. The next episode we'll be doing is a Nightmare Room episode, and I can't wait to get to it. So, please, if you liked the video, please comment down below. What did you think about this episode if you've seen it? Give me feedback on the video itself. And I'll see you next time.